Yes, of course. I'm excited about today's session.
Maybe a little bit shorter than usual because I have got to take my kids trick-or-treating this afternoon. Let's see what I got. Oh, this is we can do this as a continuation of this morning's joke. So the young newlywed actor, things were not going as well as he'd hoped. As a matter of fact, he was just reaching for the phone to call his father-in-law about borrowing a few bucks when the phone rang, and he picked it up, and it was his old college roommate who had become a zookeeper. And he said, "Hey, you know, how's it going?" His roommate said, "Well, the things at the zoo are okay. How's the acting going?" The guy said, "Well, you know, it's going okay." The zookeeper said, "Well, listen, the reason I called, our gorilla has just passed away. And we realized that the budget of the zoo will not support buying a new gorilla. And then I remembered you, my friend, the actor from college. And I thought, well, you could do this. We could just put you in a gorilla suit and you could play the gorilla." The guy said, "No, that's not really what I do." And then he remembered his financial troubles. He said, "Okay, I'll see you tomorrow morning." So he showed up at 7 a.m. at the zoo. His friend said, "Listen, this is a really easy role to play. All that the gorilla does is sit there in his cage, looking depressed and scratching himself all day. So you put on this gorilla suit, it's going to be just fine." And I put on the suit, sat in the cage, scratched himself. Children came up, banging on the thing, and he just scratched himself. The children kept coming up, banging on the wall. So finally he gave them a little wave, and the children laughed. And he got up, he did a little dance. Oh, the children were just squealing with laughter. And he remembered what he loved so much about being a performer. So he looked over into the next cage, sleeping lion, picked up his water bowl, climbed up the side of the cage, dumped it on the lion's head. The lion roared, the children laughed. The guy was so excited that he slipped, fell into the lion cage, landed on his back, and suddenly got this giant thing on top of him. He said, "Oh my goodness, don't kill me, I'm an actor." The lion said, "Shh, you're gonna get us both fired." All right, so in the last couple of sessions, we've been looking at indigenous cultures of North America. And today, we're going to be looking at some aspects of the life of the indigenous people of right here, the Seneca tribe, part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, perhaps more better known to us as the Iroquois. That was because, and numerous Native American tribes have this problem. When the French arrived, they asked a neighboring tribe, they said, "Who are the people over there?" And the neighboring tribe said, "Those people are the killers." And their word for the killers was Hilika. And so the French picked this up and garbled it a little bit, or Frankified it. And they said, "These are the Iroquois, the Iroquois." And so interestingly enough, this is one of numerous tribes that is known, for one thing, not by a name that it called itself, but by an epithet that was said by outsiders, by enemies. And also it gets twisted through this other language. So the word Iroquois, it's a nonsense. It's a nonsense version of an insult. What these people call themselves is the Haudenosaunee, which means the people of the Longhouse. And as we can see here, the Confederacy of the Haudenosaunee was 5 tribes. If we recognize this image, this flag, it represents 5 different cultures of people. And then later on, a sixth tribe, the Tuscarora, was added into this. So this is a map here of the Iroquois Confederacy. What is meant by Confederacy, we'll look at in a couple of sessions. But basically, like the Confederacy in the Civil War, it means different states. Each one makes its own laws. Each one has its own language and its own kind of version of that culture. But they have a pact of non-aggression and a pact of, like, if somebody messes with one of these states, then they're kind of in trouble with the whole thing. This is one symbol of the Iroquois Confederacy. Another symbol was a bunch of arrows, 5 arrows or 6 arrows, which was actually printed on a US dollar coin a few years ago. The dollar coin that had Sacagawea on the front. And then this bundle of arrows on the back, and this is hard to see, but the arrows are actually wrapped in a band of wampum that has this same symbol on it. The symbol of the arrows was that a person can easily pick up one arrow and break it, but that if a person picks up 5 arrows or 6 arrows, then it cannot be broken. So it was a symbol of unity and mutual defense. All right. Today we're going to be talking about the Seneca specifically. Most of what is said here will apply equally well to the other tribes of the Haudenosaunee. They had a great deal in common. The Seneca were once a migratory people. As a matter of fact, their ancestors 20,000 years ago had migrated from what we now know as Siberia over a land bridge into Alaska, then down into Central America. And then there, the population became so dense that some people moved up north and started to populate what we know as North America. And here in North America, there were experiments with pyramids and kingdoms and empires and these vast agricultural complexes. And then all of that was abandoned and people walked out of it and they started living simpler, humbler lives in small communes, what we might think of as a commune. Building different kinds of houses. Here in Western New York, the house was a longhouse. It looked, I mean, it looked like a cigar. And this is an artist's rendering of a Seneca village. Number one, they were always built by a river because rivers, for one thing, Native North Americans were really fastidious. They had a real thing about personal cleanliness, which really surprised the Europeans. When the Europeans came, they noticed that when the natives came around, the natives were always holding flowers over their noses because Europeans at the time did not bathe. Yeah, I'll answer the unasked question about that because it's kind of silly. With the rise and spread of Islam in the 600s, which requires each believer to wash themselves 5 times a day before they say their prayers. A belief spread through Europe that if somebody cleaned themselves, that they were a secret Muslim. And so European Christians stopped bathing for centuries. Not a coincidence, the Black Death, not a coincidence, all of the plagues and horrors that swept through Europe while people refused to bathe because they didn't want to be dragged out by the inquisitors and accused of secret Islam. So when we think about like those early meetings of the pilgrims and the natives, we might, and you know, if we like, we're doing like a scratch and sniff picture of the early meetings of the pilgrims and the natives, we would be surprised because we would think, well, obviously the white people would be clean and smell better, and the natives would be like dirty savages. It was perfectly the opposite. The natives could not believe how bad the Europeans smell. And we're always telling them, like, just go jump in the river. It's right there. And the Europeans would say, no, no, we don't do that. So Iroquois villages, always near rivers because people just wanted to be clean. Also because rivers were the trade highways of North America. It's the easiest way to move trade goods around. As a matter of fact, as I said in our last session, most of our North American rivers still have Native American names like Ohio and Mississippi. And that is because the native names of the rivers were so important because it was the natives who knew how the rivers connect all of the different places. And so to have one set of native names and then another set of European names like Hudson or, you know, St. James or, you know, whatever, was just going to get people hopelessly lost in a time when getting lost was bound to get you killed. And so after naming a few rivers on the East Coast, the American settlers were like, we're not doing it. Whatever the natives call the river, that's what it's got to be called. Living on a river made it easy to get trade goods in and out. It made it easy to stay clean. It made it easy to clean your, you know, your stuff. And the village that we're seeing here on a river, numerous longhouses. This would be a village like this. This would be like 400 people. All of it surrounded by palisades. That is when you cut down trees, you scrape them down until they look like telephone poles, and you just plant them in the ground to make this impenetrable wooden fence. Now, the fascinating thing about this village is that the entire thing was made out of wood. Not only made out of wood, the longhouse, you know, it was made of saplings for beams, tree bark that was laid out in strips, and everything you see here was tied together with ropes that were made of tree bark. There were no nails in building a longhouse. There was no metal, there was no steel. So everything in the structure was made out of wood, including the rope. Now, this village that you see here, because it was wood, the entire village could be taken apart and each piece of wood could be floated down the river. So if you got to the point where like your farmlands became less productive, or for whatever reason, if your location was not working out, you could take the entire village apart, float all the wood down the river, pull it back up, and rebuild the entire thing. If we went back in time and installed a satellite above one of these villages and took a photograph every week for 10 years, something really fascinating would happen. We would see that in our first photographs, it would look like this is a solid, stable thing. But over time, we would notice that if the population grew, the thing could expand. If the population shrunk, the thing could contract. If the population grew to the point where there were just too many people and not everybody was like directly connected with everybody else, the thing could split in two and part of it could move. Or if there was some disaster where two different villages like this had a dramatic loss of population, two of them could come together and recombine. So on the one hand, this is settled living. You build this thing. On the other hand, if you took that weekly photograph for 10 years and you put it together, you would end up with something that would look more like an organic cell, like something that is kind of fluid, something that can split, something that can combine. The longhouse. Now, if we know that the village needed to be movable and adaptable, why not just use teepees? I mean, when we think of the Native American, I assume we think first of the teepee. That is a tent made of bison leather. Why not teepees? Because this is Western New York, because it's freezing here, because it's a really cold climate. You could technically survive the winter in a teepee, but this was really built for winter survival. The longhouse, a longhouse could house 60 to 120 people. If the longhouse needed more space, you could take off the back wall and just extend it. The longhouse was extendable. The inside of a longhouse would look like a sleepaway camp cabin or a military barracks. It was lined with bunk beds on both sides. It had places for storage. It had numerous fires that could be burned inside night and day. It was built to somehow be able to do this without getting too smoky. People and what it could store, you could store inside of it enough food to get you through a winter. Even if you got completely snowed in. What people did was they dried their food, dried corn, squash, beans, animal jerky could be dried and smoked. And then when it came time to feed everybody, you would just scoop some snow and melt it and throw in your dried corn, squash, beans, jerky, and then create like a corn soup that could feed 120 people. Yeah, so the longhouse was also built for just, keeping people warm, keeping people packed in close to each other. And in a minute, we'll come back to what was the social organization inside of the longhouse. In the Seneca village, if you were like stumbling toward one of these things, somebody would come out to meet you. This would be kind of a big, menacing guy. That could be a little bit misleading. We'll come back to that in a minute. Among the Seneca, the men were responsible for hunting, warfare, diplomacy, all of which kept them away from their households for long periods of time. Long periods of time, men of the Haudenosaunee could go hunting as far as Ohio and on foot. So sometimes they would go out hunting and they could be gone for 6 months. They were also in charge of defense. The Iroquois invented this game, a game who, now here again, this is the native name of the game. I cannot pronounce that. We know the game by the French, by what the French called it, which was lacrosse, which is French for the stick. The French saw this game and they said, that is what this game is. It is just people running at each other with sticks. Now let's think about this for a moment. What is the purpose of a game like this? What is the purpose of having the people in the village charging, at each other, shirtless and shouting and waving sticks around? What could people learn in this way? Yes. It would be a preparation for combat, right? It was a way of kind of teaching people, teamwork and, courage in the face of great danger. Lacrosse, when we think about lacrosse or when we think about football, I mean, these games originated. Football is a game of invasions. It's a game of trying to invade somebody else's territory. And you're trying to raid their territory. They're trying to stop you. And then they're trying to raid your territory. We know these games as football, soccer, hockey, lacrosse, et cetera. But when we think about these games tend to have tribal origins. They tend to be tribal training for warfare. As a matter of fact, within the Iroquois Confederacy, if two neighboring tribes developed a neighborly friction that was in danger of breaking out into warfare, they could choose to settle it with a game of lacrosse. They could say, instead of having our warriors kill each other, we're going to have our warriors just run at each other and hit each other with sticks. But nobody's going to get killed. But we are going to determine how this thing goes. Fun fact about the Iroquois: only women could declare war. It was the Council of Grandmothers who could declare war. Men could not do it. And if the men said, no, this is really important, we really need to fight. Just as our modern Congress can withhold funding for a war, the women of the village could say, you can go and fight, but there will be no food. We will not feed you for the time that you are off doing this thing. And so it makes sense that sometimes when the guys were hopping up and down for war, the grandmothers would say, no, we're not going to have a war. You're going to have to settle this with a game of lacrosse and just pretend that you're killing each other. While the men were doing the hunting, the defense, the diplomacy, women were in charge of farming, family, and land. Among the Iroquois, only women could own property. As a matter of fact, among the Iroquois, men could not have private property. Anything that belonged to a man, he had to share it. And there was actually a custom in which sometimes if a man was returning from the forest with what he had just hunted, he would hide it in the forest and go and get his wife and have her come and carry it into the village. Because if he was seen entering the village with like a deer, he could not own private property. And so anybody could just say, like, I want part of that. But if his wife was carrying it into the village, she was allowed to say no. She was allowed to say, like, no, this is just for us. The women did most of the farming, and we'll return to that. So when we think about the Native American village, we probably assume that it was led by some like kind of large, menacing man. It's true, the chieftain, the sachem was always male, but only the elder women were allowed to vote to elect him, and they could get together and vote and impeach him. And the Iroquois expression for that was to take his horns away, because while he was chieftain, he had a set of ceremonial antlers as a sign of, as like a crown, a sign of his authority. But the antlers really belonged to the grandmothers who had given it to him and then could take it away and give it to somebody else. What was their criteria? They needed somebody who was going to look tough. The chief of a Seneca village had to be, they wanted somebody who was strong, somebody who was physically imposing. Although interestingly enough, he was not allowed to fight. He was not allowed to go to war. And if there was something going on and he said, like, I really need to be part of this fight, they would take his antlers away. They would say, you can go in just as yourself, but you're not allowed to fight as the chief of this village. They needed somebody who was like big and strong, but more importantly, they would choose him on the basis of his attention to the most vulnerable members of the community, mainly what was he going to do for the children and the elderly. And that was how he got this role. That was how he kept it. And if he ever started to act like a king or like everything belonged to him, then he would lose that role. So the Native American chieftain, and this is the same for pretty much all Native North American peoples, is not like this guy who's up there like telling people what to do and they have to do it. He's more like this guy, the person who is first to wake up, first to work, last to eat, has to do extra stuff. Let me just see, do I have that? Yeah, that's right. Okay. I just want to make sure. No. Being the chieftain of a Native American village, like being a medicine person, like being a shaman or, doctor or religious person, it was a part-time job in addition to the same work that everybody else has to do. The good news is, being Native American, working for food, shelter, basic security, was what we would call a part-time job. Doing all of that stuff, the hunting, the farming, the longhouse maintenance, all of that stuff. Probably came up to like 15 to 20 hours a week. And Native Americans in general had a lot more free time than we do. They had a lot of time to like sit around and have campfires, tell stories, do that stuff. we, in our culture, we work 40 to 100 hours a week. Native Americans have always thought that that was crazy. They've always thought that we work too hard and that we work too much. And that we spend a lot of that time and a lot of that work paying other people to not work. I mean, we pay a lot of money to, like, supervisors and CEOs and shareholders and, et cetera. Whereas if we weren't, we also would probably be working 15 to 20 hours a week, like the natives did. It's one of those classic questions, like, why have natives always, not always, but like, why has there been so much Native American resistance to becoming civilized like us? This is one of those reasons. It's because being a Native American was 15 hours a week, and being a European American is like 50 hours a week. All right. Now, being the chieftain of an Iroquois village, same as being the chieftain of a Lakota camp or most Native American tribes, it was not a job that you wanted. It came with no pay. You did not get paid. You had no staff. You didn't have a group of people. Like it was more like, like having a committee, like running a church. Except you don't get paid. You've got volunteers who sometimes help out. You could not collect taxes, and there was no force. There was no full-time police. There was no jail. So if somebody didn't do what you said, there wasn't really anything you could do about it. Being an Iroquois chieftain, the only way that you could get people to do what you said was that you had to make them respect you. And the only way that you could make them respect you was by being the hardest worker and the most generous giver. Was if the people in the village saw this person is always the first to work and the last to eat, and what they get, they share with everybody. And then people would say, like, this person is really cool. I really admire this guy. And therefore, when he gives me this piece of advice, I'm going to follow it. But if he didn't follow it, he didn't have police. He couldn't lock you up. He couldn't take anything away from you. He couldn't do anything. So this was strictly government by consent of the governed. Good. Well, so I think that's a good spot for today. Do we have any questions so far? All right. Yes. Good. How did the Tuscarora become part of it? There was now I think that was during one of the wars. I think it might have been part of the French and Indian War, when there was this war going on, and there was the Tuscarora, which suffered such disastrous losses as a single tribe that they asked if they could join this larger thing, so that, kind of and become part of this web of mutual defense. Yes, that there might be an imprecision in there, but I think that's it. Good. When I come back for my next Sunday, I will be doing a sermon about Iroquois farming, and it's really fascinating. They practiced what we call companion farming. So I'm going to do a sermon about corn, squash, and beans, and the way that they kind of grow together and support each other. And then after that service, we will continue looking at some of the details of the Iroquois Confederacy. So thank you very much. And